Hi everyone, it's Teresa from Sewing Together, and this is part 2 of our Celestial Beauty Sewalong. So last week we started preparing our pieces, so you can go back and watch the previous video if you need to, if you haven't got that far. But today what we're going to do is we're going to start sewing our pieces together, so that's the fun part. So just a little recap for you. We are using the Celestial Beauty Epiflex pack, so there's enough pieces in there to make 9 of our units, so that will give you a really good start. And of course the pieces can be reused so that you can make as many blocks as you like. These are our little pieces that we prepared last week, so that's our little templates there. We've got our diamonds with our Epiflex in the back. And we've also got our curved triangles as well. Okay, a little bit of light shining in my window here today, which is okay. We're forecast for a storm, so fingers crossed I'll get this done before we get too dark and stormy. So we've got those. We have some thread that we're going to need, which my favourite thread is Daco Bob by Wonderfil. It's a nice, really super fine thread, and if you use a super fine thread and a super fine needle, you will get tiny stitches that will blend into your fabric. So you just need a thread that will coordinate with your fabrics. It doesn't need to be an exact match. I'm using an ivory colour, so like a warm white kind of colour, and it matches beautifully with my fabrics. You're going to need a needle, obviously, so I like to use a size 10 or size 11 milliner's needle. A size 10 is usually a good starting point. A size 11 I tend to bend a little bit more, but it is pretty good as well. So if you can handle a really fine needle, they do have a fine eye in them, but of course your thread is fine, and it's quite a firm thread, so it is still relatively easy to thread. And a pair of scissors to snip your threads. A couple of little clips just to hold it all together as we're working is all that you would need. And the other thing that you may find handy, dig in my little box of tools here, is I'm going to just hand that right up to my, okay, put it right up to the camera. So this is the Sewline needle threader. So down this end, down the business end, what you have is you have a little split in here. That's where your thread goes. And you have a little hole at the end there. That's where your needle goes in. And then you just simply squeeze that together and it pushes the thread through the eye of the needle. So these are available on sewingtogether.com.au. This is the So Fine needle threader, and it is designed for fine needles from size 8 to size 11. So it is designed for very, very fine needles. Then when you're finished working with it, you just slide that back up. You don't need to take this off actually, because that's actually your needle case. And you're ready to go again, and all the mechanisms are protected inside there. So that's the other thing that you may find is handy, but let's get started. So let's get started with the fun part. So I have got my 8 pieces arranged here in the way that I want them to be laid out. I've got a couple of clips, I've got my needle and my thread. I've got my needle threaded with a double strand of thread knotted at the end. Now the only reason that I use a double strand of thread is so that my needle doesn't fall off. I know that a lot of you like to marry the thread to the eye of the needle or put a little knot at the eye of the needle. My preference is just simply to do a double strand of thread and knot it at the end so the needle doesn't fall off and it goes missing and end up in someone's foot. So you don't need it for strength with this thread. It's just purely the way that I like to stitch. So you work with the way that works best for you. And I've got my white fabrics as well here. So what we're going to do starting off is I'm going to take my 2 pieces and I'm going to stitch from the inside to the center point. I'm going to then join a third piece on and stitch back out to the outside. So I'm going to keep them in the order that they are laid out in. So I'm going to flip right over left. I'm going to start stitching on my outside edge, and of course I'm left-handed, so I'm going to stitch from left to right. If you are right-handed, you're going to stitch from right to left, although I do know of right-handers who like to stitch from left to right. Now, my little knot that I do, that a lot of you would have seen before, so I've gone through both of my pieces of fabric. My thread that's attached to the fabric goes underneath the needle. My thread that's attached to the eye of the needle goes in the opposite direction, which is that way. So I'm just going to do that again. Just untangle all of this. Let's start from the beginning. Okay, so my thread that's attached to the fabric goes under the eye of under the needle in. Wow, it's not my day today, is it? Let's try again. So I'm going to do just a little stitch first. This time I'm going to go through, partway through my fabric. My thread that is attached to the fabric goes under the needle, and my thread that is attached to the eye of the needle goes in the opposite direction. I pull it through and you can see that you get a little figure 8 knot. And I made that look a whole lot more difficult than it really was. So I'll show you again when we get to the end of the row, or you can go back and have a look at the diamond attic windows. I do have instructions in those videos as well for stitching, for completing my knot. I'm just going to move these out of the way so that I don't get tangled. And just check that I am under the video. Yep. Okay. So, because we've got the EpiFlex template, you can actually feel the edge of the templates as you stitch. And you can get very, very fine stitches, and you know that you are not going to be stitching into your template. So my stitches are about, I'm going to say 2 millimeters apart. Okay. And I'm going to just continue stitching. Okay. You can feel the edge of the template. Now, if you're really struggling to pick up any fabric, that it could be that you have folded the fabric over the EpiFlex template too tight. Now, if that's the case, all you need to do is just lift the fabric off the template, let it relax a sec, and just re-glue it down, and not quite so tight. Now, as I come up to this section, what I'm finding is that my seam allowance is actually in the way. So I'm just going to fold that out of the way, and I just feel for where the point of my fabric is. Okay, my point of my template. So it's just a stitch or two before that fold. Okay. Now we want to get our points meeting as neatly as we can, but in the next video I am going to show you a little trick that we can do to improve our points once we take the templates out. So, okay, and a couple more stitches. Just feel where the end of the template is, even if you need to just stop stitching. Find out where the edge of the template is and just stitch to the end of the template. don't stitch past it. And again, I'm going to do my little knot that I do, but I'm not going to cut my thread. So that's our first two pieces sewn together really quickly. If I just bring my pieces back, there we go, that's our first two pieces. There we are, and you can see that's our first two pieces. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to take my third piece and I'm going to attach that, and we're going to stitch now from the center to the outside edge. So there we go, I'll pop this on, and just to save my hands, what I do is I pop a little clip on here. Okay, so we are already at that center point, and you are going to just fold your seam allowance out of the way and start stitching from there. Do your little knot. If you find that your knot is a little harder to do, you can just do a regular knot, and you can also take a little stitch first if you need to. Okay, so I'm going to continue stitching to the outside edge. I'm going to knot my thread, and I am going to cut it this time. So I'll get that done, and I am going to repeat that again with 3 templates on this side as well. So I'm going to get those done, and I'll be back in just a sec. So I've got my 2 sections of 3 joined together, and then we've got 2 little petals at the bottom done. So let's just have a look at the back. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we just finger press back in place our seam allowances at the bottom in the center, so they're all still going the direction that they were pressed. We don't need to do too much about it. We just need to, you don't need to re-glue them or anything like that. Just give them a little press, because when we come to sew all of our points together and then we press the center, if these have been finger pressed back in place as we go, it's just a little bit easier. Okay, so there we go. Now our points will not be perfect, but just get them as close to perfect as you can. When we take the templates out, I am going to show you a little tip for helping with the centers and how to pull them together a little bit to get a really nice neat center. A plain fabric will show up imperfections in your prints, in your points, a lot more than a printed section will. Now if you look at mine on the whole, you go, yep, that's really great, but if you look at it closely, my points aren't perfect, but I am going to show you how we can fix that a little bit once we've taken the templates out. So don't stress too much about your points. Remember that this is your project and it's your hand sewing. This isn't a machine manufactured project, and it's not printed with all the pieces in place. So don't stress too much about it, and as you sew, your pieces will fit together better as you practice. But also when you're stitching, only stitch to the edge of your templates. So don't stitch past the edge of your Epiflex templates, and you'll find that that will help. Now with this section, I'm going to join this one on, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at where it needs to sit and make sure that it does give me, so I'm not going to make it out there. I'm going to worry about my center point and not worry too much about this outer side to start with. So if I just flip this over, move my seam allowances out of the way again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my point, and I'm going to pop a little clip on here just to hold it in place. I'm going to start stitching. I'm going to slide my knot up to through the seam allowance there and pull that open. I'm going to do my regular knot that I do right in the center. And I'm going to stitch. I'm going to move those out of the way. And this way. Again, I stitch from left to right, but if you're right-handed, you will stitch from right to left. But with this one, stitch from the center to the outer edge rather than the other way. If we need to refold that corner point outer side to make it fit with our curved triangles, we can do that. That's no problems. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to line up my ends once I've got a few stitched in place. Line up my ends, and what will happen now is that this will all fit together because it really was only a couple of threads difference. And because we're working with fabric, you will find you will get slight variations. I'm going to just tuck that out of the way. I'm going to continue stitching to the outside edge to make my half of a star. And I'm going to do the same for the other side as well. So that's next door's doggies barking on cue as usual. That's what doggies do. Okay, so I'm going to get these two pieces stitched and then we're going to join our two halves together. So we've got the two sections, the two halves of our diamond completed. And again, just go back and finger press those seam allowances in place back to where they came from. It will just make that final step after you have sewn your two halves together. It will just make it that little bit easier. So if we have that one goes there on top, and then this one presses over the top. Because what we're aiming to do after we've sewn them together, and if I flip these over, what's going to happen is our centers will look like that, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to have our seam allowances around in a circle. So what's going to happen is that's called pinwheeling, and that's going to give us the flattest option that we can get for the center with our 8 diamonds meeting in the middle. So we want to have those seam allowances pressed all in the same direction. So now you can see that these are going to fit together in theory. There we are. We're going to sew the two halves together. Now I am happy to sew from one side to the other, but if you feel a little bit more comfortable starting in the center and sewing out, coming back to the center and sewing out, that's quite okay. So you do whatever works for you once you get to this point. Also, when you're joining these half sides together, there are a multitude of ways of doing it. I like to sew one seam, so from there and back out, and then attach the fourth one, but you can sew them into pairs and sew your pairs together into halves. What I don't recommend is that you continue sewing them as individuals around in a circle. You will end up with a mess in the center. So somehow if you have two halves to join together at the end, that's the best way to go about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just flip these over. Okay. And if I just have a look at my centers, what I'll find if I line up my edge is that my centers actually will meet together beautifully. Pop a little clip on the end here. Okay. Now I can just bend this back to just see how we're going. perfect. So I'm going to sew from the center through to my point. I'm not going to cut my thread, but I am going to stop when I get to that point. So start off on the outer edge. Again, going to do my knot. Now this knot has a variety of names. To me, I was taught it was called a lingerie knot. I don't really know why it was called a lingerie knot. But I just find it really secure, and it's a very small knot. And it locks nice and tight without leaving a lump on the outside of your thread or your fabric. So I'm just going to work my way towards the center. A little bubble of thread there. Okay. Now it's super humid here in Brisbane today, and I can actually feel the glue starting to get tacky on my fingers. So summer has arrived with a vengeance. Okay, so we'll keep working our way towards the center. This is quite a quick project to stitch, and it is a great one if you want to raid your scrap basket, because you really only do need quite small pieces of fabric, and it is a beautiful scrappy project. But as I discussed with our fabric choices and our preparation last week, I like the structured scrappy look. So to use a manufacturer's pack, got a little thread there, pull that out. I'm just going to move all those seam allowances out of the way. And you can see, if I move that out of the way, you can see where my diamonds meet, and I'm only going to stitch to that point. I like to use a manufacturer's pack because it means that I have a portable project, because everything fits together, but I don't have to stress about putting fabrics together. Now I know for some of you that's the fun part, but also for some of you that is the bit that you stress about most of all. Got some little loops from the thread there. That is one of the things that you have to watch when you're working with the double thread. Okay. And I'm not gonna, normally I would go back and fix that little loop of thread. Just loosen my stitches a little bit and pull it through. So I am just coming up to my, possibly my final stitch. I'm going to put a little knot in there. I'm going to open it up and just have a look at how it's going, and that looks pretty good. So what I'm now going to do is I am now going to work on the other side. I'm going to move my fabrics out of the way and have a look at where my points meet on this side. I'm going to grab them . Do a little stitch just to hold it all together. And then I'm going to do my knot. Then I'm going to continue out to the outside edge, do my knot and cut my thread, and that is the center of my star done. So I'm going to do just a couple more stitches. That seam allowance is in the road. There we go. I'm going to do just a couple more stitches and then I'll show you the center and we'll move on to our triangles. Okay, so that's our lovely, nice, clean center. So what's going to happen is our seam allowances are going to all roll around in a circle, give us a nice flat center. If I pop that over, you can see my center is really pretty good. If by chance you end up with a tiny little hole in the center, or it doesn't line up perfectly, now mine's not perfect, but I can live with that. Don't stress. Remember, next week I'm going to show you a little tip for refining your little center point a little bit. So what I'm going to do is find my block that I have already pre-stitched. It's very similar, isn't it? Not quite the same. Okay, I'm going to swap this one out. I've cut my thread on there so I can use it to do my triangle. And we are going to get started with the last part. Okay, so our triangles are going to fit in all the way around this outer edge. Now, these can be stitched in one continuous row of stitching. So we'll go all the way around the outside. So we don't need to cut our thread. Just stitch until your thread runs out, knot your thread off and rethread your needle and just do another knot. Overlap your stitches by a couple of stitches and you can just continue to stitch. So I am going to be going clockwise, but if you're right-handed, you're probably going to stitch yours anti-clockwise. So this one fits perfectly in there with the curved edge to the outside. I'm going to pop that down there. I'm going to line up my center point and, all going well, my point of my star is going to line up with the outer edge of my white triangle. So I'm going to just pop that through there. Okay, and I am going to just continue stitching, which I'm sure you have worked out how to do by now. Do my knot. And I'm going to stitch down into my center. So I'm going to stitch down to this point. And then once that is stitched on, we will then turn it in this direction and you will stitch to the outside edge. So what you need to make sure when you stitch to the outside edge is that the edge of your white or your triangle fabric meets beautifully with the edge of your star point. So once that one is stitched in place, you'll leave your thread attached and you'll stitch your second, again stitch into the center and out, and then with your third into the center and out, and just continue working your way around until you have a complete star unit. So at this point there's nothing else for you to do, so you can continue just to make you'll have enough to make 9 stars. And I will be back next week to show you how to refine your point. We're going to be removing our templates and I am going to be appliquing them to our background fabrics. So we can get started with those, which means that once we've taken our templates out and we've appliqued some to our backgrounds, if you're wanting to make more blocks, you can actually go back and reuse those templates again and again and again and make as many blocks as you're wanting to. So enjoy your stitching I hope you can find a little bit of time during this busy period of the year. These videos won't be disappearing, so of course you can sit and watch them at any time. You can watch them as many times as you need to, and you can of course just catch up whenever life allows. So I hope you're enjoying your stitching. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the comments below or send me an email. And don't forget to also follow Sewn Together on Facebook and Instagram. And we'll see you again soon. Bye.